Welcome to the For Evansville podcast. You're listening because you care about Evansville. You see what's beautiful about our city, but you also see real challenges, and you want to be part of the solution. But where do you start, and how do you make a lasting impact? That's where For Evansville comes in. Through storytelling, films, podcast episodes, and gatherings, we drive meaningful conversation about our city's needs and opportunities. We connect people, organizations, and the local church together, creating a community where collaboration leads to real change. And we believe that you are uniquely positioned to make a difference. So if you're ready to move from feeling overwhelmed and disconnected to feeling empowered within a collaborative community, you're in the right place. Don't just live in Evansville, be for Evansville.
Hello, welcome to the For Evansville podcast. Welcome to 2025. It seems appropriate for what we're talking about today.
That's right.
But yeah, it's our first episode of the year and a new season. We're really looking forward to our first mini series of the year is diving into Talent EVV's report, an annual report. Where there's 4 pillars, focus areas that we're going to go through. So as we be looking forward to the next couple of episodes because we're going to dive into these more specifically. But today we have Tyler Stock with us. He's the Executive Director of Talent EVV. So welcome, and let's just dive into this report. How did it get started? Just take us through kind of Talent EVV in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that, and really looking forward to the other content as well and some of the other speakers on the focus areas. Really, Talent EVV was Talent 2025, dating back to 2018. Really looking at how do we align community resources in a meaningful way and thinking about collective impact and how we create a shared community vision around some really key goal areas related to quality of life and quality of place. And really last year in 2023 was the first ever annual report that was released. And the thought process behind that was since 2018 and the work that had happened is how do we tell a better, more cohesive story about the success that our practitioners and content experts and organizations and institutions and businesses are doing to really advance the quality of life and place here in the region, right? How are we thinking about regional transformation? And we saw a unique opportunity to start telling a regional story about the successes and the failures that we've seen in the 4 focus areas that we call out in the report, right? So, dating back to 2018, we really set out for 2025 goals, right? So how are we growing a population? How are we creating educational attainment for students that are up and coming? How are we thinking about improving health outcomes? And then how are we reducing poverty? So last year was our first annual report, and it was really a great opportunity for us to highlight some of the successes that we've seen and really to give a platform to those practitioners as they've gone out and made significant monetary investments, time investments, and talent investments around those key focus areas. So that's some of the backstory there, and we felt like there was a good response to the 2023 report. So kind of carrying that momentum on and looking at how do we, again, tell that story for 2024.
Yeah, it really seems like these focus areas and the reports are a way of taking this sometimes vague and ambiguous idea of becoming, like growing as a community or becoming a community where everyone can flourish. It's a way of making that a little more concrete and saying, like, what do we really mean by that? And what are the steps that it's going to take to get there? And then what's the work that's happening in those spaces, and what are the opportunities for funders or for businesses or for nonprofits, all of these different participants in the community to recognize, oh, this is kind of where I fit in that vision, and here's the story of the successes in this area or the challenges in this area. Would you say that's kind of like a good description of the role that this plays?
Yeah, that's actually a really good description. And I think, dating back to what we did last year, we were thinking, like, how do we communicate around this really amorphous, complex idea of community transformation and regional opportunity, right? And what we landed on was, hey, let's really highlight milestones and accomplishments, key investments. And if you look back to last year's report, there was a lot in it, right? And we almost felt like, hey, we need to really more clearly communicate what these unique focus areas really mean to our community in a more meaningful way. So what you'll see in this year's report is, rather than throwing 20 different milestones against the wall in each of these focus areas and giving love to a lot of really great initiatives and organizations, we thought, how can we lift up one single strategy or initiative that we feel like has just an immense amount of opportunity to catalyze growth, transformation, opportunity, and impact in those focus areas, and give it a little bit more depth and breadth to the conversation, right? And try to look at that from a more intentional framing, so that the practitioners that are engaged in those spaces can, again, more effectively tell their story, right? Be it to funders or businesses, or just more broadly their constituents. So yeah, I think that's really was the heart of why we've started the report, and now kind of transition the report as we move forward.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So there's these 4, I just want to say what the 4 pillars are. It's population growth, thriving workforce, live well, and upward mobility. How did you guys land on those 4?
Yeah, so if you look back to the work that happened in 2018, really this work started through a lot of excitement and energy from our business community, and thinking about how do we build a nationally recognized place to call home, right? And you can have that really nice trendy tagline, but what does that really mean when you start thinking about, the change that needs to happen and needs to occur for that to really be the truth, right? And when we started looking at, hey, what's catalyzing other regions, what's catalyzing community transformation across the country, we really looked at, what are those social determinants of health? What's the vibrancy of our regional economy? Are our young adults wanting to stay here, and are other young adults attracted to being in this community, right? So I think we were very strategic around the goals that we selected, and even the specific indicators that we looked at within those goal areas. And I think what we found over the last really 5 to 6 years, because we do benchmark this year over year, we are making some progress, but our peers and aspirations are also making some progress in that same space. So again, challenging ourselves, like, what can we do different to put ourselves in a position to really exceed in those areas of opportunity that might look different for poverty reduction than it does population growth. And I think the framing that you're situating those conversations within is extremely important to thinking about the outcomes that you're driving towards.
Yeah. So looking at other communities that are similar size or have similar traits to Evansville, and saying, like, how does our community stack up against other communities in these areas, and what can we learn from other cities, and what can we learn from things that are happening here to grow and get better as a community and become a place where people want to stay, and where people want to live, and where they can thrive in a whole bunch of different areas, right?
Yeah, we intentionally looked at 10 different peer and aspirational communities, so 6 of those being peer and then 4 of those being aspirational. And the criteria that we used back in 2018 to really filter and kind of select where those communities are, and what makes them peer and aspirational, we landed on a few different attributes, right? So we wanted to stay away from communities that had a land grant institution, knowing that can bring significant research funding to the university, and it can play a different type of role than some other 4-year and 2-year institutions that maybe we have here regionally versus, what we see in West Lafayette with a Purdue, right? Other aspects that we really looked at is what communities have a similar economy to ours. So we've got a really fast a really fast growing health and life sciences sector. And then we also have a really large manufacturing sector. And those things can really bring unique attributes to the types of talent and people that you need in the community for those economies to flourish, right? And we could go into more detail about, why that's the case from manufacturing versus health and life sciences. But ultimately, we really wanted to look at something that was more apples to apples when we started looking at those peers and aspirationals. So, like economies, no land grant institutions, really looking at overall regional GDP and leaning into communities that had similar GDP to ours. And then also looking at communities specifically in the Midwest, right? Don't want to compare ourselves to 2 coastal areas. Those might be outliers or exceptions.
Sure.
And then finally, really trying to find those communities that had some sort of inland waterway, right? Recognizing that the Ohio River does play a really significant role in our quality of life and quality of place, not just from the destination side, but also from the economy side. And obviously reminded of that if we look out the window right here. We've got a pretty amazing river behind us. So
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear you talk about how all of those different aspects of our community, and as we're looking to other communities to try to, compare ourselves to, really, it makes me think about how all of these different characteristics of a city are interconnected, and things like being next to a river affect our local economy and our, like the experience of living in the city. It's not separate and distinct. They're all interconnected. And so I'd be curious, as you have been in this role for a number of years and as you've engaged this work, like how has that shaped your personal perspective of our city? And like, I feel like that has to make you have maybe a more specific understanding of what makes Evansville unique or special, or like you're maybe more well acquainted than the average person with kind of like the personality of Evansville and its like unique characteristics. I'm curious what that experience has been like for you as somebody who's from this area originally, and like how has that shaped your perspective of the city?
yeah, that's a really good question. I think a really challenging question to answer in a couple minutes, right? But as I think about what unique personalities or characteristics our region has, as we think about others or just uniquely to us, right? I think the intersection of all of these focus areas and how our regional economy is so interdependent on itself, right? So we've got a huge nonprofit sector here locally, and the way in which that nonprofit sector engages with our business community is really unique and actually really inspirational in a way that I think not every community has the luxury of leaning into. And, from my time in this work dating back to really kind of 2019, 2020 timeframe, just being able to see how business leaders engage with the nonprofit community from a transformation perspective has been really encouraging. Now, that's not to say there's not a lot of work to be done in terms of really clearly communicating the needs of both of those sectors uniquely. But I do think, what we've been able to accomplish and achieve and the alignment that we've moved closer towards in that space has just been really, really positive. And I'd point to a couple examples like Evansville Promise Neighborhood. I look at, regional cities and then Ready 1.0 and Ready 2.0. And really looking back, the formulation of what is now Talent EVV and what was Talent 2025, it was really our business community recognizing the important role that our nonprofit sector plays as it relates to quality of life and quality of place, and really asking the nonprofit community to champion that work in a really meaningful way, right? And I don't think if you look at, other communities and as I look at some of our peer and aspirational communities, I don't see that same level of collaboration and engagement that you get between two very different and unique sectors that in a lot of ways don't ultimately really need to talk to each other, but to make true change, it's important that they do talk to each other. Yeah.
And that's what I really like about the report, just reading through it. In each of these areas, there's very specific stories of people working to help these areas. And I've been surprised at the number of people working together on a solution towards these. So I'm looking forward to those future episodes where we have those people on here talking about that collaboration.
Hey, this is Pat. I remember feeling disillusioned about what I perceived to be a lack of collaboration among Christians in Evansville. 150 churches, 150 ministries type of thing. Then I discovered For Evansville, an organization that's devoted to bringing together Christians to address the city's most pressing issues, like kids growing up in poverty. And that's why I joined the For Evansville Collective, to be around more people like me who love Evansville. So be For Evansville and be part of the collective. You can learn more at forevansville.org/collective.
What to you has kind of stood out to you as you have looked at all these numbers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, what's really stood out, and this is likely not unique to us as a region, but something, globally folks have experienced. So obviously this started pre-COVID, right? And I think there were some aspirations and intentions about what this work could really be, 5, 6, 7 years from when it started in 2018. And, the core team and many nonprofit partners and business leaders really decided to not move the goalpost whenever COVID happened, right? So we didn't circle back and say, hey, because of COVID or because of some of the challenges related to our economy coming out of that, we're going to change the jobs and wage growth goal, or we're going to change the goal of bringing 10,000 more people into our community. We specifically said, hey, we don't want to move that goalpost, and we really want to hold ourselves accountable to those original goals. And I think what stands out to me is our resilience and adaptability coming out of that, right? So within the report, you kind of have to like read between the lines to get this, but there are 9 specific indicators, data points that we're really looking at year over year to understand progress to those goals, right? And, what you'll see is it's a little bit of a mixed bag, right? So population has stayed fairly flat. Wages have grown. Population with a bachelor's degree has grown significantly. High school graduation rates have fallen off a cliff because of COVID. Health is still challenged, and poverty has been drastically reduced. And I'm going to put air quotes around that because we know the influx of capital through the federal system during COVID really, drastically changed the living wage and the income that folks had at a specific level. So I think what stands out is that we didn't change the goalpost, and we did that for a reason, because we wanted to look back in 2025 and really understand, like, were we successful? And if we were, where were we successful and why? And where did we have failures and why did we come up short? And were those failures really due to, internal systems, or were those failures due to macro level pieces within the environment that, at the end of the day, we can't control, right? And again, I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag even within that. But I do think it's giving us further direction and encouragement that as we move forward, having shared community goals is extremely important. If you don't, you don't know where you're headed as a region. You don't know where you're headed as a community. And I think being able to put those high level goals out there and say, hey, we all recognize that raising wages is extremely important for everyone, not just the C-suite, not just for, the entry level worker. Raising wages is critical as we think about, increasing living wage, driving down poverty, attracting young talent. So that's one example of the matrix work. But I think, to answer your question, that's what's unique is we stayed on track and we decided not to pivot, even though we had some external circumstances that really challenged this kind of work.
So were the goals met for 2025?
Yeah, if I'm thinking back to the 9 specific goals, I believe 4 or 5 of them were met, and then the other 4 or 5 were not met. So again, mixed bag, right?
Yeah. I think something that I've appreciated about just your personality, Tyler, and conversations that I've gotten to be a part of around some of these conversations, both around Talent EVV and just data in our community in general, is I think a lot of leaders in our community have a real willingness to have the honesty and courage to engage with data in a realistic way, and to say, we're going to set these goals for our community, but we're going to recognize that we don't have control over all of the complex systems in our community. And we're going to have the courage to look at the data and pay attention to how we're doing as a community, and to lean into working together and influencing these things, even with the recognition that we might fail at some of the things that we set out to do, but that's okay. And we're not going to let that either deter us from paying attention to data at all, or to lead us to set goals that are safe and achievable, and that we know we're going to hit a home run every time, because we're going to set goals that are small and controllable, right? And I think it has been a really important thing for our community to say, we're going to set ambitious goals and we're going to learn along the way, and we're not going to move the goalpost when something happens. We're not going to, do what we can with the data to just always tell a really positive story and pat ourselves on the back and, make everything seem like a home run every time. We're going to have the courage and the honesty to say, we're going to take a real look at what's going on and we're going to learn along the way. And I think that process has just been really good for our community and for the leaders involved, to really gain a better understanding of what's working, what's not working, how do we need to grow, how do we need to learn. And I'm excited that is able to be continued through annual reports where we're looking at the data again. We're going to revisit this area. We're going to say, what have we learned about this area that we're kind of struggling with, like population growth. We haven't quite solved the problem there, but we're going to stick with it and we're going to try new things and continue going after these goals, even though they're really ambitious.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there really quick. I think as I think about some of the evolution of this work since 2018 and 2019, what's been really encouraging to me is really the philosophical mindset shift that I've seen from the executive level, be it private sector and nonprofit sector and across the board. And what I mean by that is, early on there were a lot of conversations about what are the early wins, what are the what are the milestones that we're driving towards, right? And I think the educational component of, hey, this is really long, complex, challenging, interconnected work was something that at the beginning was really hard for those executive C-suite level folks to get their arms wrapped around. And, fast forward 5 years to 2025, I'm sitting there having a conversation with some really key business leaders and nonprofit leaders, and we're having conversations about, what's the longevity of how we can continue to lean into this work? What are the broken systems that we need to start, really looking at and having more intentionality around them? So I think that shift of, hey, quick wins, early milestones has really been fun to watch. And now we're talking about, what's our next 5-year plan? What's change going to look like 10 years from now? What are those big transformational projects that may take a couple decades that really change the trajectory of our region? And you can point at a number of those projects that are really already in the works that you would look back at. And I think that philosophical shift has been encouraging. And I think if we're going to continue to differentiate ourselves against these peer aspirational regions, that's the type of mindset that we have to wake up with every single day.
Yeah.
So what about those conversations that you've been having makes you excited for the future? Are there anything that you're like, I'm really looking forward to this, I'm really excited about, or kind of hopeful for Evansville's future?
Yeah, I would just kind of point to the engagement and the alignment from those that are executing and implementing this work, right? And whenever I say that, I look at some of the stories and strategies that were highlighted in this year's annual report, but I also think about like other broad initiatives that are happening. And I think pointing to the fact that we are really far ahead in some of these spaces from a systems level standpoint is encouraging. And I think what I'm most excited about is what does 5 years look like from now when you look at some of these focus areas, right? So not to like steal their thunder, but the Love Your Neighborhood initiative, right? And thinking about resident-led revitalization, or I think about really strategic regional marketing and talent attraction in those spaces. Or I think about the cradle through career work that's happening in Promise Neighborhood, or the long-term strategy with our riverfront development, right? Like, I think we are building the foundational systems that need to be in place for us to really influence what the future looks like for the Evansville region. So I think it's really exciting, and it's encouraging that it seems like we have the right people in the right seats to continue to think strategically about those specific areas. So that's super encouraging to me.
That's awesome.
I would imagine that there are probably some listeners who are listening to this podcast and will hopefully listen to the subsequent episodes where we dive a little deeper into some of these areas, who they're in positions of leadership where they can connect the dots immediately between this report and some of these strategies and focus areas, and they can see the relevance of these conversations. We probably also have some listeners who they're just average everyday people in our city, and they might feel like they don't have the level of influence to play a role in some of these things. So I'd be curious to hear your perspective, Tyler, and maybe yours even, Adrienne, as well, about when you think about kind of the everyday citizen in Evansville and the role that they can play in a big vision like this, or the reasons that they might want to lean in and understand some of these high level dynamics in our community, and the way that that understanding might shape the way that they're participating in our community, or the way that that broad understanding might guide some of their engagement with local businesses or nonprofits or educational institutions or things like that. What are some things that come to mind that you would say, like, this is a valuable aspect of understanding our community for even the everyday person who there might not be a direct connection with a partnership or something like that?
Yeah, probably two sides of that question that I'd really point to. And I think first I would point to practitioners and content experts. And for the everyday listener, I would say, those are the folks that you're likely running into at your PTA meetings, or when you're engaging with your counselor at school, or when you're talking to your HR professional at your place of employment. So I would say it's likely that those folks in some manner are probably plugged into this broader ecosystem. They're just not, maybe being forthcoming with that information, because again, they might realize that, hey, this is someone that's living their everyday life. And, we're not going to dive into all the strategy here, but I would say, like, ask questions like that when you're in spaces and understand, like, what level of engagement do those content experts and practitioners have with this broader ecosystem. And you may strike something where they're like, oh yeah, that really reminds me of this initiative that we're working on at a more of an organizational or strategy level. Like, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
I think the second piece that I would point to, and this is, kind of my own, I guess, personal bias, but like how I would potentially think about engaging if I was, just a resident walking down the street. A great example was the surveying and the visioning that happened around River Vision. So I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but I know more than 1,500 individuals here locally filled out the survey to really share what do you want to see with the development on the riverfront, right? And then I think a similar scope of work has been happening with Evansville Promise Neighborhood in those specific census tracts that they've been targeting. They're asking families, what kind of resources, what support do you need as a family in the TP Park neighborhood or in the Jacobsville neighborhood? And I would say, like, obviously folks get really tired of being surveyed, but I can promise you this is a very high touch community. And if you give your feedback, you're going to have the opportunity to co-create, right? There are very few, if not any, rooms that I walk into where the folks around the table don't want resident-led insight and information. We are all hungry for how we can better serve the people that live here in the region, right? I was born in Posey County, now live in Posey County. I see myself as an everyday resident of this region, and, I would want the same interaction, if I wasn't plugged into some of these key initiatives. So I would say be a part of the co-creation process. Answer surveys, ask really hard questions, continue to show up in those public forums. There are a lot of ways that's happening right now in the nonprofit and the public, or the nonprofit, the public, and the private sector. So show up. That's what I would say.
Yeah, last night I was actually looking on Facebook. I like to follow the Evansville Facebook to kind of be informed of just what the general public says about Evansville.
It can be an interesting place to spend your time.
It is, and it's sometimes depressing, but case in point, last night there was somebody that was relocating, and so they were asking, or they had relocated, and they were saying, like, this, they were kind of hopeful, and like, this feels like a place of opportunity, like, and it was like kind of this charge of like, let's work together, but how can I get plugged in? What resources do we have to make Evansville a better place to live? And the comment section was just, some were helpful and very, positive, but there's also this underlying narrative that everybody in power in Evansville is corrupt and they only want money, and, or, those narratives. And I was thinking about all of our podcast episodes that we are doing and talking through And I was like, that is not my experience of Evansville. The leaders that we get to talk to, the people that we've had on this podcast are all very for Evansville. And there's so much good work and good collaboration. So I would say just for the average listener, just the stories we tell ourselves about our city and staying informed and staying curious and finding the good and sharing those. Even if it is on that Facebook post, I almost was like, check out Talent EVV and check out For Evansville, like shameless plug here. Right. Don't find out that I work for them, or whatever. But it was just that narrative of you can make a difference here. There's so many initiatives that are happening, so much collaboration, but they need help. They need volunteers. They need any skill set. You can probably find a place where your skill set, we always say everybody in Evansville has value and can offer something. Yeah. And find out what that is and plug into it. And you can be a part of all of these numbers going up and these changes. So that's what I would say.
I feel like that's a super important mindset for people to have, especially right now where there's all kinds of things going on a national level in politics. And when you spend time on social media, the conversations can very quickly feel like the world's coming apart and there's nothing that I can do about it. And everybody has a different story about what's going wrong and all of this stuff. And I think it's such a much more fulfilling and valuable use of your time and energy to say, how can I look at what's happening in my community and how can I get connected to opportunities to invest in how things are changing and growing here? Because when you look at this report or when you talk to different leaders, it's very clear that things are not coming apart in Evansville. And the reality is that's probably true of most other communities. And so shifting our attention and our imagination away from really fearful narratives that are ambiguous and hard to get our hands around, and where frankly we don't really have a lot of power or influence to affect those things anyways, and saying, man, I'm here in Evansville, Indiana, or in the Evansville region, and there's some really great people here that I can work together with, and I can figure out how can I fit and how can I contribute and make things better for my neighbors and better for my community.
Yeah, I would say, building on that, investing in yourself is investing in the region and vice versa, right? Investing in the region is investing in yourself. Yeah. We can all grow and transform and have opportunity together, 100%.
That's great.
All right. So on that, where can people find the report to read it?
Yeah, so you can go to www.evvregion.com, and then I think we're also going to have a couple other publications pick it up, and you can find that I think on our social media, probably Facebook. I think
we'll put it in our show notes.
Yeah, it's on LinkedIn as well, and then for sure on our webpage though.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
Appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much, Tyler, for being here.
Yeah,
thanks for doing all this hard work and being for Evansville.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Just super honored to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to tell a little bit more about Talent EVV. So thank you both.
Absolutely.